We are joined by Jitendra Singh, Minister in the Prime Minister's office in this edition of the interview. Sir, let me begin this session of interview by asking you, what is the reality of the stone throwers in the Valley of Kashmir? Who are these people?
See, at the outset, I would just like to take you back to the background of the separatist activism as such. And I've always held this view, and a considered view, and at the risk of sounding unorthodox, I have been articulating it time and again, that separatism or so-called separatist movement in Kashmir Valley is not a movement of conviction, it is a movement of convenience. And therefore, separatist politics in Kashmir Valley is politics by other means. Most of them, and many of them, have been part of the mainstream politics till a few years ago. Some of them also draw all the perks, privileges, including the pensions as former legislators. And when they could not make it in the state way, they indulged in this. Likewise, also, I think the evidence comes out in the form of the fact that the so-called mainstream Kashmir-centric politicians also, when they are out of power, they start using the separatist or the semi-separatist jargon. When they get back to power, they overnight again start swearing by India, swearing by Jammu Kashmir as part of India, as an integral part of India. And as far as the stone pelters are concerned, this is one of the means for them to promote their activism, to create a disturbance and to hold the center and the government of India to ransom. And they have the advantage of being liberally funded by hostile agencies like Pakistan and the ISI. And therefore, this is more of a mercenary stone throwing, I would say. If it was a stone throwing inspired by certain ideology, then why would not these so-called Kashmir-centric leaders send their own children to do this holy task? Why ask a neighbor's child or a poor man's child to do so? And that is precisely what we wish to carry forward to these youngsters, innocent youngsters, not to be taken in by this bluff. And mercifully, gradually, they are coming out of this myth now.
Do you believe that the local political actors in Kashmir, they try to glamorize this stone thrower, the stone pelters?
Certainly, anything that tends to bring them to limelight or to the media focus serves as an oxygen for them, because they have to thrive by media attention. And this attracts some media attention for them. But yes, again, none of them, most of them have not even contested a popular election. They have never gone through the test of a ballot. Whereas, of course, the so-called Kashmir-centric mainstream politicians have done so. But they too, on the eve of an election, resort to same semi-separatist jargon or separatist jargon, which is, I would say, quite irresponsible on the part of any Indian politician who claims to be a part of the mainstream Indian polity.
So then how are you addressing this issue of stone pelters in the valley? Because somehow there are a lot of people would say that the stone pelting within the narrative of Kashmir has to do with stone pelting in other countries, but both are two different regions and with two different histories. So what has your government done to counter them both at the level of ideology, policy, politics and security?
Yes, I agree with you, and I think what is most important and a lasting solution is to reach out to these youngsters and make them understand what the reality is. And as the army chief made a very fervent appeal recently, asking the parents of the children not to allow their children to come in the line of fire, which was taken otherwise in certain quarters. But I, at that time, also said that this kind of an appeal could have come only from an army or an army chief who is sensitive to perform his task professionally, while at the same time consciously serious about not causing harm to innocent lives, including innocent children. There's a very strong Pakistan factor, and of late there has been evidence, as all of us know, about the social media and the other means being used from across the borders. And it's been come to notice that soon after an encounter starts, the Pakistan rumor mill or the propaganda mill gets into action. There are hundreds and dozens of messages in series sent on WhatsApp, sent on SMS, asking the children to come out of their houses and immediately reach the site of encounter.
That's a recent phenomenon.
Exactly, very recent. And it seems from the tenor of the message, it seems as if the message is emanating from the site of encounter, which is not so. The message is originating maybe from a foreign soil. And these children get provoked and they get instigated to come out of their houses and risk their lives. So, A, we need to make these children understand about this mischief being conducted on them. B, we also need to counter this propaganda by social media and by other means, which I am sure the government agencies as well as the other concerned are doing. And I think the civil society also has to rise up and to counter this technologically strategized, I would say, media warfare.
So pellet guns have been very, very controversial. The power guns didn't work. Now the pellet guns with some sort of modifications are back. Your detractors say that, we want some engagement, not modification of pellet guns. And pellet guns themselves have become symbols of various means of various sections of society. So how do you address that issue? Because a lot of people say a lot of youngsters actually faced grievous injury because of the use of the pellet guns.
No, at the outset I would say that a person who is not an expert in the field would not be fully entitled to have a last word, and that applies to most of those from my genre. I have always held this view for years together, that those of us who are political functionaries, however high they may be placed, a minister or a chief minister or whatever, is not entitled to have a last word on security related
operational matters.
Certainly, because there are experts doing so, and they are facing the situation and have to take a decision on the spur of moment. But as we understand now, there's a lot of politics also involved, as you said, detractors. Now those who have made an issue out of pellet guns, whether it be the Congress, whether it be the National Conference, are the ones who very conveniently facilitated the use of pellet guns much earlier than BJP came into power, either at the center or in the state. For example, in 2010, it was the Congress and the National Conference government in coalition over there. So, as I said, there's a fashion, if not a phenomenon, in Kashmir politics. These regional Kashmir-centric political parties, when they are in power, they change their language and they speak in a different language when they are out of power. They suddenly become wiser and become sympathizers of the separatist sentiment. So, having said that, as far as the pellet guns are concerned and the injuries caused, of course, nobody would deny that it hurts when a youngster suffers from a grievous injury or loses eyesight, and that is a very awful scene to watch. But the security forces are from time to time trying to evolve different methods to contain the crowds which suddenly emerge at the site of encounter. And they have also tried the different kinds of weaponry besides the pellet guns, including the tear gas shells and also the spicy shells, etc., etc. And there have been also attempts to use these pellet guns targeting the lower limbs instead of the upper part of the body. But I think the final word should be left to them. What we can do as political functionaries, as a social functionary, is to mobilize an opinion in this society which forbids these youngsters from coming out to the site of encounter and becoming a target of such pellet guns.
You come from the state, then how do you politically stabilize the state?
I think
many would say that election is part of the democratic process. There are other ways of engagement in democracy. So how do you make this state of J&K like any other state, like Madhya Pradesh or Uttar Pradesh or Karnataka?
See,
is that possible, sir?
I tell you, as I understand, there shouldn't be much of a different scene between Jammu and Kashmir and any other state. There are one or two factors which are peculiar to that. Dissent is there in every state. In the state of Jammu and Kashmir, particularly in the valley of Kashmir, this dissent takes the form of successionist protest, because you have a fertile ground to feed that. You have a Pakistan which is always looking forward to that. And dissent immediately articulates as Hindustan Murdabad, Pakistan Zindabad, because they think that, carries the day for them, and that has certain bargaining value as well.
Gets you more attention.
Exactly. And therefore, that dissent part is to be streamlined in a more healthy manner, in a democratic manner, without stifling the democratic outlets. Because as goes the famous proverb that if you close all the democratic outlets, then the undemocratic outlets begin to open up, yes, which include, of course, the terrorism, unrest, etc., which also would not be a healthy phenomenon. So we have to educate the children, and the youth there, as I said, are receptive now. More than 65% of the population is youth.
Are you saying these form of protest should be, in a sense, de-glamorized?
One, they should be de-glamorized. B, there should not be a premium on anti-India activism, okay, to put it in a nutshell, which is happening in Kashmir Valley. Once there's a protest which is anti-India, it attracts attention of the media, it attracts attention of the other agencies, and it also sometimes creates some kind of a possibility for these protesters to engage in some bargaining exercise. So there should be no premium at all on anti-India activism, whether it is in the form of physical violent activism or in the form of intellectual activism. As you've seen of late in this country, anybody who holds a seminar and tries to question the integrity of India would become an instant newsmaker or an individual in discussion in the media. So I think that is something, the bottom line has to be drawn, which has been drawn even by the most developed democracies of the world, including the USA and UK. Unfortunately, maybe we are still an evolving democracy, because 70 years is not a long life in the history of a nation. And as I said, the coming of this social media, the coming of internet, the coming of real-time reporting has also made a difference. And I tell you how, because the youth have been for centuries, for decades, for generations being misled in Kashmir. But now, and there was a popular refrain that some of the Kashmir-centric leaders had developed the habit of delivering one statement while in Srinagar, second one when they reach Jammu, third one when they reach Delhi. But now they don't enjoy that liberty because there's a real-time reporting. And therefore, they stand much, much more exposed before these youngsters, the youth. And the youth now are also having an inherent urge to be a part of Prime Minister Modi's development march, which is being joined by the rest of the country and the rest of the youth.
So in your manifesto and in your political rhetoric, you have spoken about the rehabilitation of Kashmiri Hindus in the valley. But the process has been slow. Your partners, the opposition in Kashmir, both of them, they have not taken that initiative to do that. Isn't this cultural intolerance? Isn't this injustice?
No, certainly at the outset I would say, I would agree with you that unless,
and it is your government in J&K.
Unless the return of Kashmiri Pandit is accomplished, we would not be able to restore the Kashmir Valley to its original cultural format, because that composite civilization of Kashmir would not be complete without the presence of Kashmiri Pandit.
So what have you done about it?
As far as Bharatiya Janata Party is concerned, even when we were not in power, it's been our consistent stand and belief and conviction that Kashmiri Pandit has to go back to the valley, and we are always there to come to their rescue. You would recall that in the initial years of the exodus, which happened around 1989-90, we barely had governments in many of these states. But even at that time, wherever we could manage, we ensured reservation of seats in colleges for these children, whether in Maharashtra or Madhya Pradesh or wherever. So we have been consistently standing by their side. Now, strategically, to be directly answering to what you asked, yes, what are you doing? On principle, the return of Kashmiri Pandit has to be both respectable and be secure. You cannot push them unless you are able to give them a sense of being safe, secure, and also having a dignified return and dignified settlement over there, which of course we believe would happen in course of time. And at the same time, we would also have to keep the priorities of the Kashmiri Pandit community in mind. What exactly do they wish to have? Number of options have been discussed over the last 2-3 years, even in the Ministry of Home Affairs at the center, about how to return.
But then what do you do when in valley, when there's a land earmarked for Kashmiri Pandits, there's a hue and cry in the valley. Absolutely. If there is a land to be earmarked for the soldiers, then there's a hue and cry. Yes. And it is your government in place. You should have taken bull by the horn.
I'm glad you asked that, Now, there are two parts to it. Of course, as far as the Kashmiri Pandits are concerned, as I said, we have to keep their priorities in mind, and therefore various options are being discussed from time to time with the representatives of the Kashmiri Pandit community. How this return is to be accomplished, in what format, what would be the settlement, what would be the format of the colonies, or the composition of where they settle. B, the other part. There is a hue and cry, as you rightly said. Once the land is earmarked for the security forces, the land is earmarked for the Kashmiri Pandits. And I think as far as that is concerned, the government is very clear. We do not tolerate any kind of discrimination based on religion. And Kashmir belongs as much to as a Kashmiri Hindu as it belongs to a Kashmiri Muslim. And we, for that matter, stand for an equitable development of all the three regions of Jammu, Kashmir and Ladakh, and at the same time equitable development of all the communities which belong to Jammu and Kashmir. And therefore, the government is very clear. If a land is to be acquired for security forces, it would be acquired regardless of what some of the disgruntled elements or some of the sponsored elements from Pakistan tend to articulate or tend to resist.
But then, sir, the question would say that your government has not been able to even ensure that the Hindus get the minority rights. You know, there's an ongoing controversy in the National Commission, the State Commission of Minorities. If a community is minority in the state, it should get the right. What is the problem in that, sir?
No, actually, I'll put it in the right perspective. This issue of minority is not per se related to Jammu and Kashmir. I think it's not been rightly projected. Basically, in the Constitution of India, I don't know whether to call it an anomaly or to call it some kind of an aberration. In the Constitution of India, we have certain identified communities which are designated as minority communities, which includes Muslims, Sikhs, Parsis, Jain, Buddhist. Now, it is not only Jammu and Kashmir. There are about 7-8 such states. Since I also look after Northeast, we have Meghalaya, we have Arunachal Pradesh, we have Nagaland over there. Neighboring to Jammu and Kashmir, we have Punjab, where Sikh constitutionally in minority are in majority. So this, of course, is an aberration. And now, of course, the Supreme Court is also taking a view. And I'm sure in course of time, some mechanism would be evolved. Because what is happening is that if you go by the constitutional position, a Muslim is a minority member. Regardless of whether he is living in a state where he is in majority, like Jammu. Similarly, Christian is a member of a minority community, even if he is living in Meghalaya, which is a Christian majority state. A Sikh is a member of a minority community, even if he is living in Punjab, which is Sikh dominated. So there is certainly an aberration which nobody can deny, and that is exactly what has seized the attention of the Supreme Court and the Ministry of Minority Affairs.
But sir, are you committed to correcting this?
I am not in a position to say so, because this falls in the purview of the Ministry of Minority Affairs. But what we have learned from the Minister of Minority Affairs, Mukhtar Saab, and the Ministry of Minority Affairs, they have taken cognizance of it. They have also taken cognizance of the views expressed by the Supreme Court, and they are seriously trying to work out the best viable way out.
So the Prime Minister had said earlier that the blood and water cannot flow together. The cross-border raids took place. But even then, the attacks within J&K have gone up. Our army is being attacked, the base is being attacked, senior officers are being attacked. Do we really need to change our policy? Do you think more cross-border raids are required? Do we need a different tactical approach, more hardening of stand? What needs to be done so that, we don't continuously see our soldiers being killed by terrorists?
I agree with your concern, and it's a very well taken concern. It will be the concern of every patriotic Indian. Strictly speaking, I am not in a position to give a very precise, straight answer to that, because this is an issue which would require a response of a very technical and expert nature. But broadly speaking, I have every reason to believe that our security forces, our security experts are from time to time, depending on the evolution of the situation, adopting strategies to combat what is happening, combat the mischief being exported from Pakistan soil, whether at the borders or within the borders. The spurt of violence happening from time to time, of course, as you rightly observed, has been noticed over a period of time. But I think the intelligence gathering mechanism and the retaliatory action has been much, much more professional and full of clarity compared to what it was earlier. I have a part of the international border in my constituency. And when I go there, I find the security forces having a very high morale for the simple reason that they say that for the first time we have clear orders to retaliate to any aggression in a professional manner without any inhibitions, and therefore the civilian population living over there also feels quite confident with a high morale, and they say it's after years and years together that we find a retaliatory action happening from this side which was not happening earlier.
But sir, doesn't it worry you that the whole idiom of protest, you know, as you saying that's very glamorized thing to say Azadi in Kashmir, has shifted from Azadi to a lot of Islamic symbols? Isn't that a cause of concern, because the sort of the rise of ISIS and hardened military Islamic, I would say, terrorism which has emanated from West Asia throughout the world can have its own effect on Kashmir?
No, I agree with you. I agree with you, and nobody can deny that. I think it should be a concern of every right-thinking citizen, not only of India but anywhere living in the world. And as you partly answered the question in your question itself, that this is somewhat of a worldwide phenomenon which is now spreading across the globe. But incidentally, since Kashmir was a vulnerable situation, because already there was some kind of a turmoil going on in the name of religion, and therefore the perpetrators of this kind of doctrinization found it more convenient or feasible to make inroads into Kashmir soil or Kashmir Valley. So that is, as you rightly mentioned, I would accept that's an added challenge which we have to meet at multiple levels. A, of course, at the level of the military aggression. B, at the level of social reorientation, social education, social awareness. And C, also at the level of the reach out to the families as such, so that the difference between the right and wrong is conveyed by the elders to their children, by the teacher to his pupil, so that a youngster is not left exposed to be educated by extraneous sources or illegitimate sources.
Okay, so before I close my interview, there's been a lot of controversy around RTI. What's the truth of the matter? Why are these suggestions being sought, sir?
No, I think this controversy which has been noticed over the last 2 days is much out of lack of understanding of what the entire issue is all about. Now, I'll give you a small background. There is nothing as such, to put it very straight, there is nothing as such that the present government has done to fiddle with RTI or to add to it. On principle, the present government is committed to absolute transparency in governance, absolute citizen centricity in governance, and absolute ease in governance. Now, what some of the Congress friends are doing or saying is, because they have not actually studied the subject. The RTI was brought in by them in 2005. Then they brought in some regulations, some rules somewhere around 2007, some of them in 2012. Many of the regulations which they brought in were not converted into rules, as should normally happen. They spent 10 years and could not do it. Now these regulations which they are crying hoarse about, this fee and the 500-word limitation, etc., is what they have done. It's not the present government. These are the regulations which have been drafted, proposed, the part of the RTI document by the UPA government. Some of them were brought in 2005, some of them were in 2007, some of them were 2012, when we were nowhere around. Now what we are trying to do is to complete their unfinished task with the involvement of citizens. I'll tell you how. Recently, Supreme Court passed a direction that, look here, this RTI was brought in 2005, these regulations were brought in 2007, 2012. Rather, this is a comment on the UPA's lack of accomplishment of their task. And the Supreme Court was of the opinion that if you don't convert all these regulations into rules, then all these judgments and various decisions taken by the Information Commission benches across the country may tomorrow become null and void. So there is an urgency to frame rules based on the regulations which are part of what the UPA gave us and we inherited from them. So in fitness of things and in full honesty, since we had to proceed, what we thought fit was to put this in public domain and at the same time invite opinion of the people and the citizens on these regulations. So we have in fact tried to correct.
So it's not the final word?
No, it's not final. Of course, it's not final. We are just inviting. But what I'm trying to say is that the draft which has been put for the opinion of the citizen is also not our draft. It is the draft of the UPA. Unfortunately, they have not studied the subject. If they study the subject well, I'm sure they'll regret having said what they have said in the last 2 days.
And lastly, sir, coming back to the issue of Kashmir, on which I think I should conclude my interview, we began by the issue of stone pelters, we'll end by the issue of stone pelters. Mehbooba Mufti, your Chief Minister, has said that, the stone pelters are troubled youth of Kashmir. Their pain should be understood. Do you agree with that?
See, there's a difference. There's a difference. And going back to what Mahatma Gandhi said, means as important as ends. Without having to comment on what the Honorable Chief Minister has said, as far as I understand and my understanding over the years is concerned, there may be aggrieved youth, there may be pained youth, there may be youth who may be disillusioned, not only in Kashmir, in any part of the country. But the means of the descent has also to be within a framework. Now, does that mean that you would encourage disillusioned youth living in Delhi to start pelting stones? So that is not I think, the best means to convey your pain. And the best means in a healthy democracy would be to engage with a government which is much, much more sympathetic and sensitive under the leadership of Prime Minister Shri Narendra Modi than ever before. I can say this on the basis of evidence as a student of science. Prime Minister Modi has visited Jammu and Kashmir more than half a dozen times in 2.5 years, and even unscheduled visits, like he was there during floods. He spent his Deepavali with the flood victims. That was his second or third visit to Kashmir. So where would you have a better and a more receptive dispensation than this? So therefore, maybe there are other means also available compared to stone pelting, which could be encouraged among these youths. And that is precisely what we want to appeal, not only to the youth, but also those who nurse them, be it their teachers, be it their parents, be it their elders, or be it their other members of the civil society.
So thank you for making it.
Thank you very much.